Hey everybody, welcome back to Closing Conversations. I'm your host, Max Notis. This is a solo episode, and it's a year-end episode, which honestly feels a little strange to say out loud because when I started Closing Conversations, I didn't really have a master plan. I just wanted to be honest and have honest conversations about sales, about leadership, about building teams without the noise, without the posturing, and without pretending that there's really like one silver bullet out there that fixes everything. Now, over the course of this year, we've published 17 episodes. I sat down with founders, with operators, with consultants, and with sales leaders across a lot of different industries. And slowly, without forcing it, this podcast became something real. So before we get into anything else, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to every guest who showed up willing to be candid, not polished. Thank you. And to everybody listening, whether you found this through commission, through a guest, or even by accident, thank you, for giving your time and attention. This episode right now, this isn't going to be a highlight reel. It's not a recap of every conversation. It's really a reflection. Because over and over again, there's certain ideas that just kept showing up, no matter who was sitting across from me. And I want to pull on these threads. So, without further ado, as always, let's get into it. I spend most of my time with inside and outside sales teams. This is coaching reps, working with founders, fixing systems that look fine on paper, but they don't hold up in real life. And what I kept noticing is that people talk about sales one way in public and a completely different way in private. And Closing Conversations became a place for those private conversations to take place publicly. And what surprised me was how consistent the themes became, even when the guests came from totally different worlds. So I'll put it this way, no matter what the episode was about, whether it was about hiring, AI, compensation, mental health, marketing, outreach, the same underlying question kept surfacing, which was, what behavior does any of this actually create? Not what does it promise, not what does it look like on a slide. What behavior does it create when real people are under pressure? And I talked about it with people, deep in AI. I talked with people who are building content machines. I talked with consultants, with founders, and with sales leaders who are in the trenches. And whether we were talking about LinkedIn, recruitment software, sales enablement, or even therapy, the message was consistent, was that tools don't fix unclear expectations, that tools don't fix misaligned incentives, tools don't fix weak leadership, they expose it. And AI didn't replace sales, it amplified whatever was already there. So stronger teams got faster, broken teams got louder. And the guests weren't anti-tech, far from it. They were anti-tech as a shortcut. And that reinforced something that we see constantly here at Commission. If the behavior isn't right, the tool just makes the wrong thing happen faster. Leadership doesn't get outsourced to software. And every conversation this year, in one way or another, it all pointed back to that. Now, the second thing I kind of want to talk about here is hiring, really being the original sin. This kept coming up, sometimes explicitly, sometimes quietly, but hiring, or really more accurately, mishiring. We talked about hiring myths, about founder-led sales, about recruitment, about onboarding, and the pressure to scale way too early. And what became painfully clear is that most sales problems aren't performance problems. They're hiring problems that show up 6 months late. Roles get missold. Expectations stay vague. And leaders hire for comfort instead of reality. And then everyone acts surprised when everything falls apart. And one conversation this year really crystallized this for me, the idea of business trauma, that bad hires don't just hurt revenue, they compound stress, they erode confidence, they make good people feel like they're failing in roles that were never set up to succeed. And we kept coming back to the same truth that you cannot hire your way out of not understanding your buyer. Founder-led sales isn't optional early on. You don't earn the right to delegate sales especially, until you understand the conversation yourself. And every time that step was skipped, it showed up later in churn, in missed quotas, in constant reorgs. So hiring isn't just an operational decision, it's a leadership one. And the most emotional cost of getting it wrong is much higher than most people are willing to admit. Now, pivoting from there, if there was one topic that quietly connected more episodes than I expected, it was compensation. Comp plans come up directly in some conversations, and they come up indirectly in almost all of the conversations we've had. And here's the truth that kept surfacing. Your comp plan is your loudest leadership signal. You can talk about culture all day. You can talk about teamwork, integrity, about long-term thinking. But what you pay for is what people believe. And comp plans aren't math problems. They're systems of belief. They tell reps what matter. They tell managers where to focus. And they tell the organization what behavior is rewarded and what's quietly tolerated. What stood out to me is that nobody talked about comp in isolation. Comp always came up alongside trust, alongside stress, alongside whether people felt safe taking risk. And when comp was unclear, people got really defensive. And when it was short-sighted, people played small. And when it was aligned, something really, really interesting happened. Coaching worked. Conversations with their buyers got much more honest. Reps stopped performing and started selling. Comp didn't just drive behavior. It changed how people showed up. And that's why we spend so much time here at Commission. If you get the comp wrong, everything else becomes harder. But if you get it right, teams stabilize and they scale. Now, just pressing pause here for a second. Before we go on to the last thing and the real wrap here, I want to take a second because this year we crossed about 150 downloads in the US. We had a couple hundred downloads around the world. Listeners around the US and a handful of other countries, 17 episodes every continent we've been listening to, except Antarctica. We're going to come for that one next year. These aren't massive numbers, and that's okay. This podcast wasn't built to go viral. It was built to get real. And to everyone who reached out to me to say an episode hit home, that matters more than any metric. And now, what this year clarified, if I had to sum up what this year of closing conversations clarified for me, it's this: that sales problems are rarely about effort. They're about clarity. They're about alignment. They're about leadership showing up where it actually matters. Now, over and over again, guests talked about vulnerability, about pressure, about burnout, about the emotional side of building, and building something that people don't want to talk about. And it confirmed something that I deeply believe: sales is human, it's emotional, and it reflects leadership more than any dashboard ever could. And this podcast didn't change what I believe, it sharpened it. It gave me a lot of confirmation that the work we're doing, slowing down, getting honest, coaching people like us to be human, this isn't soft. This is the hard part. It's really hard to be yourself. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. And once you do, you're going to be so much better at everything that you do. So all in all, thank you for listening. I appreciate you. We appreciate the time that you've put in. And we'll see you next year in our next conversation. Take care, everybody. Bye. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, you can always catch us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more episodes of Closing Conversations.